Hi, I'm Jordan Carpenter. This is my dad, Jay Carpenter. My dad's a broker and I'm a loan officer over at HomeQuest Mortgage. But this is gonna be a quick video on the 2-1 buy down. And our goals, as always, is to really prepare a path for home buyers, especially first-time home buyers, and help them through all the twists and turns of buying a home. So a lot of people looking at housing market in 2023 might be wondering, is there even an opportunity to buy a home? And the answer is yes. Home prices have decreased, mortgage rates have decreased, and inflation looks like it's starting to come down finally. But probably one of the biggest ones is seller concessions.
So what's a seller concession?
That is a great question. A seller concession is when the seller agrees to cover closing costs normally directed at the buyer.
So why would they do that?
Again, great question. You're ahead on the slides. We're in a buyer's market. That means there's more homes than buyers. So all the people who are selling homes are like, geez, who's going to buy my house? And when someone is coming to buy the house, they're like, I haven't seen a buyer in a long time. If you look on like Zillow or Redfin, there's a lot of homes that have been listed for months and months.
If you're looking and you're trying to buy a house and you're seeing that prices are starting to come down a little bit, that might give you a hint that a buyer's willing to take less, and or they're going to be willing to pay you as a buyer to buy down your interest rate or get a seller concession.
Yeah. So let's break down a little more how seller concessions work. So when you buy a home, you're going to provide a down payment, closing costs, and those together will equal your total cash to close. And so the seller concession can cover one of two things. They can cover the closing costs, and typical closing costs would be like the appraisal and the title fees to get the name in your home and insurance fees and things like that. But another big thing that we're kind of going to dive in deeper is buying down the interest rate, buying down your mortgage payments, buying down the interest rate. There's two ways they can go about this. They can do a temporary rate buy down or a permanent rate buy down. Both are kind of similar in how they're set up. In a temporary rate buy down, a fund is set aside upfront by the seller to supplement monthly payments. That was a mouthful. Let me explain that. So the temporary rate buy down will buy down your rate for just a couple of years, and the permanent rate buy down will buy down your rate for the whole length of the whole life of the loan.
So what you're telling me is there's there's several different types of temporary buy downs. There's a 3-year buy down, there's a 2-year buy down, there's a 1-year buy down. And depending on how much your seller will help you with or give you a concession for, you might be able to implement one of these strategies to help you.
Yeah, that, and there's some other factors, but yeah, for the most part, how much this concession is that they can give you, or that is allowed. Sometimes there's a limit on how much is allowed.
Right.
So let's go through the temporary rate buy down, and which is one that we think is so important and such a big deal. This is an old example, but it still holds true. So let's use the example of Daphne.
Yeah, I see the interest rate is pretty high on this. So yeah, this is an old example. Make sure you understand. This is just an example. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Daphne's dream home is for sale for $400,000. And she's looking at it and she's excited because before in 2020, it was like $500,000. But interest rates are high. And she comes and she talks to us and she says, well, what should we do? We say, why don't you get a seller concession to buy down your rate? And we'll do a 2-1 buy down. The interest rate would be bought down 2%, the 2-1 buy down. So 2% the first year, 1% lower the next year. So the first year, instead of 6.97, it's going to be a 4.97 interest rate. The monthly payment that Daphne would pay is $2,033 a month, which is $611 less than normal.
So the seller is paying $611 towards your monthly payment.
Correct.
Okay.
And so you multiply that by 12, and that's $7,332 that the seller would be covering for that first year, the 2% less.
Yeah.
And then the next year, because it's only 1% less, that total is $4,476. So as a lender, we can kind of work backwards and say, okay, the amount that the seller needs to provide up front is this $11,808. And for Daphne, it's going to save her, quite a bit on those monthly payments. And meanwhile, Velma comes over and she's like, well, if you could get $11,808 in seller concessions to buy down the rate, why don't we just use that to lower the purchase price of the home? You see what I'm saying? Instead of buying at $400,000, lower it by $11,808. Theoretically, that sounds like a good idea, but interest rates, they're so powerful that, as you can see in this chart below, Daphne actually still spends less over, even after over 5 years. The break-even point isn't until year 10 when lowering the purchase price of the home was a better idea. And you might be wondering, so why haven't you talked about a permanent rate buy down versus a temporary rate buy down? The biggest thing about a temporary rate buy down is this asterisk that my dad's head's in front of is if you refinance, I'll read it to you.
Oops.
If you refinance and get a new loan, any amount of the seller concession not already used will go to the principal of the next loan.
So that's a pretty good deal.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
This is economic data. This is Federal Reserve economic data, stlouis.org. You can look up this anywhere. These are mortgage rates. And during COVID, you can see there's my finger over here. You can see 2020 COVID had interest rates come down pretty significantly, lower than I think we've ever seen them. We saw, in the twos. And then inflation and whatnot, interest rates have increased quite a bit. That being said, they're starting to come down again. And so the likelihood that you're going to refinance in the next 3 years is really high. Whatever your rate is that you're in your home right now, I highly doubt you'll have that same rate 3 years from now, even 2 years from now, really. So going back to the example with Daphne, let's say she refinances after 1 year. So she's used that $7,332 amount from the seller concession that first year. When she refinances, that $4,476 that she didn't use, that gets applied to her next loan amount. That's coming with her. So here's kind of a chart to help show it a little bit better. The top line bar is a temporary rate buy down. We use the example of a 2-1 buy down. Of course, there's 3-2-1, there's 1-0. There's different iterations of a temporary rate buy down. The permanent rate buy down, all that money from the seller concession gets applied for right up front, and that covers the whole 30 years of the mortgage, which is great unless you're going to refinance sooner than 30 years, because then you can't take that money with you.
So what you're saying is, on the temporary rate buy down, there's a portion of your money that's put into taxes and insurance into your escrow account, and then also the seller is putting money into an escrow account for you each month as you make those payments. And if you don't use all of that money, it carries over.
Yeah, that's still your money.
Okay.
That was a quick example of what a 2-1 buy down is. That's why we are really pushing for them, because again, the data is showing that most people are going to refinance soon. That being said, a seller concession for a permanent rate buy down is not a bad idea either. A seller concession is great regardless. We've seen.
Well, we actually did that here just recently, where a client was barely qualifying and they needed that permanent buy down so that they could qualify.
Yeah.
So that worked.
Yeah. So there's different reasons or ways to use a seller concession, but this is an example of a 2-1 buy down or temporary rate buy down, and why we think it logically makes sense to
right. We can help you decide, figure out which way is the best for you.
Yeah. So of course, if you want any more information, we do have a whole course for first-time home buyers that breaks down buying a home and all the twists and turns and how to get the best terms possible. But we do try to provide educational content on our social media. Really, the big one will be pushing it towards YouTube first, and then kind of sharing that through Facebook and Instagram. And those are our handles if you want to follow us in those directions. But anyways, if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call and we'll do our best to explain it and help you out.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Thank you.